council meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge. Ann, would you lead us in the pledge, please? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you'd remain standing for a moment. Has some exciting news that our law director sent me today. Quote, Mayor, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed itself and determined that prayer to open a legislative session of a local government body by one of its members that is generally Christian in tone does not violate the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution. So we will be bringing prayer back to our council meetings by me or anybody else that would wish to say something is welcome to let me know before the meeting tonight. I would just like to take a moment of silence. Obviously, you know what's happened today, and recently we had a tragedy at Licking Heights, which I'm still in shock about, and because that's very close to home. But we also lost Friday a young lady, 26 years old, that worked at Pataskala Banking Company, passed away, and we're still trying to find out exactly what happened, if she had a medical situation or whatever. But let's just have a quick moment of silence, please. Okay, very good. All right, Kathy, roll call, please.
Howell.
Here.
Hayes.
Here.
Barstow.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Hogan.
Here.
Walter.
Here.
Carter.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum present tonight. First thing on the agenda is citizens' comments. You want to do citizens' comments first and then launch into board and commission interviews? Okay. Anybody wish to speak tonight? Yes, sir. Need your name and address, and you have 5 minutes to speak tonight.
Peter D'Onofrio, 539 Bristol Drive.
Okay?
Several of you may remember 2 years ago next month I presented a proposal from 98% of the residents on Bristol Drive to get our drainage ditch taken care of. At the time I was told that it was too late for the 2016 budget. This was November 2015. Not a problem. I understand that. In the spring of this year, I emailed Mr. King and Mr. Gross requesting a status update. At that time, I was told Mr. Gross was no longer with the city and Mr. Hayes had taken over. If I remember correctly, Mr. King said that he would have Mr. Hayes contact me. August 14th, I have not received a reply from either Mr. King or Mr. Hayes. It's October 2nd. I still have not received a reply from either Mr. King or Mr. Hayes. Now, I don't know what the problem is. I don't know whether you don't give a damn about the people on Bristol Drive, whether the people on this council are incompetent, but my neighbors want to know what's going on.
Okay. We don't get into any discussion back and forth, but we'll look into the situation. And it's Mr. Haynes. Alan Haynes is our Public Service Director. Haynes, Haines.
Okay, my apologies.
Yep. And we'll have one of those gentlemen contact you as soon as possible.
Mr.
All right,
Mayor, am I allowed
thank
to say
you.
something? Am I allowed to say something?
Sure, go ahead.
Sir, I'll be in contact. I was unaware of the problem, but you are in my board, and I'll reach out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else wish to speak tonight? All right. Board and commission interviews. You want to take over here, sir?
Tonight we have interviews for Board of Zoning Appeals and Personnel Board of Review. We'll start with the Board of Zoning Appeals. And first up on my list is Ms. Ritterbach. That's TJ Ritterbach. Is she here? Okay. Second on that list is Mr. Chad McKittrick. Is Mr. McKittrick here? Should have known that. Mr. McKittrick, could you maybe give us all just a little bit of an outline about what piqued your interest in the Board of Zoning Appeals, BZA?
Well, I have recently I've owned my home on the west side of Pataskla since November of 2009. The past 3 years, I've been involved in our homeowners association as one of the board members. My term with that is expiring at the end of this year. In addition to that, my wife has accepted a school position up at Youngstown State, and she's living up there during the week, and we're taking turns on the weekends visiting each other. So that has left me a little bit of time to do some things, and one of the things I would like to do is offer my services to the city of Pataskla. I've lived here at various times, but for a long time I went to high school at Watkins, and my parents lived out here for a long time, and my aunt and uncle still live out here, and I care a great deal for our city.
Thank you. For the record, would you also give your name and address?
Sure. My name is Chad McKittrick, and it's spelled with 2 D's. Never mind
CHADD.
the agenda there. My first name is actually Daniel, but I go by Chad. My address is 1399 Celtic Drive in Pataskla.
That's great. Typically, we kind of throw questions open to council if they have any specific questions. I would do that at this time. If anybody has a BZA interview type question you would like to ask, and if Mr. Walther.
Mr. McKittrick, you had put in your letter that you were applying for both or one or the other, BZA or planning and zoning. Do you have a preference on either one of those?
I don't have a preference. My feeling is that wherever I would serve best for the city is where I would prefer to be. I do have experience as a staff attorney for Common Police Court in Franklin County. One of the things that I did for Judge Sheward was write his civil decisions, and part of that was administrative board reviews and cases on appeals. And so that would probably maybe uniquely situate me towards like a zoning appeal situation. I can't remember if I specifically had a zoning appeal that I wrote a decision for, but I can remember writing decisions for like unemployment compensation. And there was one situation where there was a swapped pig in some county in Ohio that I wrote a decision for.
Yeah, the swamped pig answer. I'll ask one, unless anybody, just to keep it going. Do you believe that any variances should be granted, and how do you approach the question of variances? Obviously, a BZA is dealing with questions like that. So,
variances should be considered very carefully. I mean, we create a set of zoning rules for a particular purpose, and that's to create uniform sections of the city and such. And so there are some times, and I realize just in the practice of law, there are exceptions to every rule. The one thing I have always looked at as a member of our homeowners association is how does it affect your immediate neighbors? And does it fit within the overall plan of the neighborhood and such? And so, there could be strict writings and strict regulations on things, but sometimes I looked up something earlier this week, actually, with regards to the Board of Zoning Appeals or the zoning and planning, and it was an individual that looked for a variance with regards to the addition of a shed. And so the addition of secondary buildings on his property was exceeding the square footage that was allowed under the zoning. And so when I was looking at it, he had built his garage, it looks like earlier than the city was created, before it was a village. And, looking at the various properties around it, it was more like a bar establishment. and a church and such, and so it didn't seem like in that situation, his request would be too outrageous. So, to answer your question, there's lots of things to consider. Obviously, you look to the rules as to what you consider, and those rules are established by the city code, I believe. And you also take into effect how it affects your immediate neighbors and the entire area as a whole.
Any other questions?
One more. On the HOA, do you anticipate continuing to be on the HOA board?
No,
Okay.
my term is up, and it's up to someone else to take up that task.
But you'll still be cooking cheeseburgers?
I can do that.
Okay, very good.
Any other questions? I thank you very much for both putting your name in for both and for being here this evening.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I don't know if it's a point of order, but as a request, I don't know who would have been responsible for contacting or making sure that Ms. Redeback knew about this evening. I just want to make sure that.
We can double check with that. I know BJ and I believe your office made contact with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They were aware of when the interviews were.
Part of the advertisement.
Yes.
I got you.
And I had I had correspondence with Mr. Rodeback about it, so.
Okay. Well, you never know. Certain situations might arise, but I don't know if the people will take that into effect. I was thinking about possibly filling open vacancies tonight. We'll see if that still happens. But okay, let's move on to the Personnel Board of Review. Mr. Dancourt. Good evening. Mr. Court, at this point, I realize this is we had made a decision long ago about having regular serving members still come up and see us. So it's kind of a formality, but I really appreciate you being here.
Glad to do it.
I'm Dan Cordy, 1761 Keela Drive. No problem at all.
A little bit about yourself. You're already on the.
Yeah, I've been on the Board of Review for about 4 years. Last fall was elected chairman of the board after 3 years in a vice capacity. Like our group, we have a really good group. And fortunately for everybody, we haven't had a whole lot of issues to discuss. So we've helped a couple of departments round out their staff roster and help resolve some employment-related decisions that they've had to make. But it's been a fairly quiet tenure so far on the board.
I don't get to that very often, but I have heard that it's a good group.
We had a good time.
Are there any specific questions for Mr. Cordy? Again, the formality of it, my apologies for necessarily bringing you out, but thank you very much for your interest and your service.
My pleasure. Mr. King, you have a
I will just say Dana has been a great asset to the PBR.
Thank you.
And I know recently they worked with the police department to look at their eligibility list and their sergeants, so Dan's been great.
Thank you very much. I'd be happy to continue in my current role if the city will have me and the board will join.
Absolutely.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
With that, I will turn over the magic gavel back to the mayor.
Introduction, discussion, and approval of consent agenda matters.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Hicken, seconded by Mr. Barstow. Discussion and roll.
Al?
Yes.
Hayes?
Yes.
Barstow?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
Hickman?
Yes.
Walter?
Yes.
Carter?
Yes.
Consent agenda passes. Don't feel like you have to stay, Dan. You can go home if you want to.
I'm sorry, Mr.
And Chad, you can go home too if you want to.
Where did you say?
Or stay. Okay, very good. Kathy, I'm looking here, Board of Taxation Appeal. Is it time to advertise for those folks?
Yes.
Okay.
I had gotten some emails.
So,
One appointment is by the mayor and 2 appointments are,
there you go. One by the mayor and 2 by council?
yes.
Okay. And that has been advertised?
Not yet.
Not yet. I would advise to advertise. One is by the mayor and two by council.
Yes.
So would you go ahead and advertise that for us? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Okay, reports. Glad to see Mr. King and Mr. Haynes back from their worldly and stately vacations. Glad to see you guys back safe and sound. Had a great power show. It was a little hot, but better than hurricane weather, as I said probably about 1,000 times when people would say it was hot. It's better than rain. And want to thank Mr. King and Public Service Department for assisting. Couldn't have done it without you. Our attendance records on Saturday were, we broke some attendance records on Saturday. Friday's always a setup day, and Sunday's kind of a relaxation day, but Saturday was awesome. We had 5 or 6 events going on at the same time, and for anybody from 5 years old to 90 years old, so it was a great day. As you know, if you've seen your quarterly newsletter, on the front page, I always do a little intro, and this month, or this quarter, I did a reaching out to the residents and the businesses and the like. As we get closer to building our new police station, I asked folks if they were interested in any way, shape, or form in donating to the police station monetarily, or if we had a certain project that they were interested in, to please let me know. And I've gotten already 6 replies on either cash or materials. So I'll sit down with Mr. King and Mr. Nicholson here soon, and of course Chief Brooks, to kind of come up with a plan on how where we're gonna put that cash or what we're gonna do with it. But it's off to a good start, and a lot of good community support. So I'll sit down with you guys when I get a chance. Mr. Hicken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got a couple items tonight. The first thing is, and I don't want to steal Mr. Barstow's thunder necessarily, he and I haven't had a chance to talk about, but we do need to reset the date for the budget meeting. And I don't know, Mr. Barstow, do you want to do that under a finance report, or do you want to take a crack at doing that now? Or
I'll talk to Jamie and BJ about it. Is it okay if I just get back to you on that to see what they want to do, or you want to talk about it out here, or it doesn't make any difference to me?
Mr. King?
We want to go ahead and talk about it, and I will throw out that, we have this month, we have council tonight and the 16th. And I know that I was not going to be at the last one when it was held. I'll be out of town in San Antonio for the ICMA conference, 22nd through the 26th. So we do have 5 Mondays if we want to do a Monday, but
Yeah, next Monday's a holiday,
yes.
Columbus Day.
So I guess I'm up for doing it either way. I'd like to, but I think I was sorry that we had that events transpired against us to have it. I was actually looking at like the 11th or the 18th also. I don't know how people feel about Wednesdays. I know that sometimes Thursdays are, and I also want to ask the administrative staff as well if they can be here for those days.
Scott, what's the Wednesday schedule for?
For Planning and Zoning Commission, it is the first Wednesday of every month.
That would be good. Be clear.
One of the reasons that Mr. Barstow, one of the reasons that I was looking at that is I think we have a first reading on this tonight.
Correct.
And the 16th would be the second reading night, and usually that's where lots of amendments and changes kind of get put in. Mr. King?
I will say I'd like to have it sooner rather than later. If we do amendments, 3rd reading, it has to sit for a 4th, which is okay. That'd be the second meeting in November, but sooner we can have it, the better.
But I would also remind everybody that I give some deference to the finance chair because this is a kind of has always been a finance type meeting. So
I mean, I'm with Mr. King. I'd like to get it done sooner than later. The good news is we're still we're still, because of the hard work from the administration, we're still way ahead on things. So the 11th is, if that's what we're proposing, that's fine.
would that work for council members? More or less. I mean, does everybody have access to their calendars? And
Either one's good for me, the 11th or the 18th.
I was going to say what time.
well, that would be the next question. It's nice that we've narrowed it down to the date.
What are the 3 dates again?
Actually, I think now we're on the 11th.
Okay. Wednesday the 11th.
Now, time both for the administration and for council, what is dinnerish 5? I think 5 is the absolute earliest that we can have it because
I will certainly say on the 11th, whatever time, 6 would be good. I think there's going to be some discussion, so the earlier we can do, the better.
How about-
Usually the budget discussion takes some time, so.
about 6 to 7:30 or 8 on the 11th.
6 o'clock's fine. I can get here by 6.
Looks like we have is that all right?
Work first.
I believe that falls on one of my days, but I can check it with, catch up with Jamie later.
Okay.
My shift days.
Okay, then let's shoot for that, the 11th. I'm sorry, Mr. King?
I'll also say other directors that work.
I've got a conference that day, but I should be able to be back in time, 6 o'clock.
And I also throw out that, leading up to that or after, if anybody wants to meet with Jamie and I, like we've done in the past, please let us know and we'll make time.
Okay. Next item on my thing was I wanted to make sure, Mayor, that you had all the names of the comprehensive plan suggestions from council.
I do.
Okay, good. Next thing on my list is in front of you. I put some basic fire information. First one are 2 pamphlets on burning and open burning. It's a time of year when people are starting to burn leaves and whatnot. If this is simply information for citizens, I've put some on the back table of those, and it's just information. I don't have any necessary follow-up. The next 2 items are the legal-sized pieces of paper that you have in front of you. These are the way the West Licking Fire District, the multicolored one is the way the West Licking Fire District breaks out their zones. And when you look at that, this is just, I know I forward every member of council my fire reports. Things like this are sometimes handed to us, just as you walk in, they're not included, and sometimes being color-coded, it wouldn't matter if they were included anyway. So what you're looking at on the multicolored one is the zone, the 401, 402, 403, and 404 indicate the fire stations, with 404 being the one on Taylor, 401 on Broad, 402 is Kirkersville, and 403 is Mink. And then you can see how the different calls have come in. You can obviously, this is just for your own education. You can see where we get most of our calls that we respond to as a district. And the second one with all of the dots on it, those are individual runs, January 1 through August 31st of 2017. Again, it's just a visual representation for where we have made responses. It's not broken out by fire versus EMS, but it's just a little extra piece of information that I thought everybody might be interested in. I'm happy to answer any questions on it, or if you want to contact me personally. And if citizens would happen to want that as well, I can get that for them. So it's just information, but it's just kind of gives you a snapshot of how busy the district is and where busy areas of the district are. The final thing I have on my agenda is a discussion that I wanted to have about some questions that were raised about utilizing city resources for city activities or for activities in the city, might be a better way to put it. I had talked to a couple of council members. We did receive an email and some feedback from citizens about why is the city using signs to let people know about, for instance, the power show. And I wanted to have an open discussion very quickly amongst council to see, I guess, just to take everybody's temperature on it. I know I have some ideas, and I don't necessarily want to throw them out immediately, but I wanted to have, if anybody had something that they wanted to say about it, I think this is a time when we might discuss it and also utilize Brian's legal expertise as it pertains to, is there any problem with having used these signs? So I guess I would ask that question first of Mr. Zatz.
No, I don't think there's any, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If it's council's decision to do that, I don't find any problem with it. Lots of places do it.
Clarification, when you say council's position to do that, or is it the administrator's position to do that, to utilize those signs? I'm just asking for clarification.
Sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, council controls all money because you make the final decisions on all appropriations and how things go. Now, whether that actually then goes to an administrative decision, because that's where council lets it, I would say at the end of the day, the buck always stops with council because you're the one who controls. So that's why I say truly a council decision. But if you decide to sort of delegate the ability to say, well, we can use that, and then however specifically it's used could be a decision from the administration.
So would it be something where you would want to have that as a budget item, to have a discretionary type of use for community events, community functions where, you know, signs could be utilized or personnel could be utilized to augment those events? Is that the right path to go down?
It could be, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I think I also want to say that, or I don't also want to say, but, you know, anytime that city staff are being used, it should be paid for from what they're being used for. So if, I think it makes sense as our events continue to grow, as we get more involved, for there to be a budget line item to pay for that stuff. I am a huge believer, and I think everybody up here is, in community events. It brings people into the community. It brings people out. They talk to their neighbors. They talk to whoever, people come into the community. It helps local businesses. So, you know, I'm not as rigid as saying, hey, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't put up signs. We shouldn't do all this stuff. We have them. If they're available, we should do it. But at the same time, as we grow, I think that we should have a budget item to pay for that stuff.
Mr. Nicholson?
Yeah, Tim and I had a conversation earlier about this. Really, you have kind of two issues here. You have the authority to do it and the funding to do it. I mean, yeah, they tie together, but the authority is one thing, and the funding, the budgetary appropriation is something else. The only concern I would have is, like with internal controls, the value of an internal control needs to exceed the cost of an internal control. So if we have to jump through a tremendous amount of effort to reallocate $100 of wages to a different fund, the cost benefit really isn't going to be there for us. I mean, the discussion that we had was, a good example, in New Albany, they have fireworks, and they spend $40,000 or $50,000. So there's a line item because it's a very significant budgetary item. I mean, I think if we're talking big dollars, city funding something, yeah, maybe we break it out, but we need to make sure that the cost of allocating the funds or whatever doesn't exceed the benefit of it.
Skips. Miss Carter. I can't believe I did that.
I'll give you that one. Just once, though. It's easy. We've had that discussion a number of times at the park board meetings about the events that go on in the city and if they should not be streamlined somehow. You have a number of events at Veterans Green. Is Veterans Green a park? The things that get put up in it by Eagle Scouts, the events that go on at Veterans Green, and it kind of varies throughout the city with that kind of stuff. The Christmas parade and security is another question. So we have a number of events that as we grow are going to require us to be, I believe as a city, to have a presence there. So we need to find a way to handle city events. While it's wonderful that we have volunteer groups and nonprofits that tend to put these things on for us, who's liable if it's on city property? I mean, we really need to look at that carefully, especially as we get bigger.
Mr. Walther.
I think that to add on to that too, I think that there's a way of identifying which events the city will participate in, and if we have to have this discussion about, are there events the city is not going to participate in? Without having direction, I think, and Brian hit this on the nose, if council hasn't made a decision, I mean, ultimately we're the ones who get the phone calls about it. We're the ones that have to answer to it. And if we haven't said, yes, we're going to do this event, no, we're not going to do this one, then I think that's a discussion we have to have up here to have, the 7 members of council make that decision. And I'll just throw out an example. There was some baseball tournaments that were held, and they had to do a number of different things. They had to jump through a number of hoops to have the tournament on city ground. They had to pay for things, and they had to supply, although somewhat questionable whether they supplied everything they were supposed to. That's not really the issue, but they were required to do things, and that had to come out of their pocket. And to turn around and then say, well, the city's going to sponsor these events, I think that's a discussion that we have to have, and we have to have a criteria to say why that event is sponsored by the city. And I'm just going to use the Power Show as an example. That was an event that was originally something that the basically a city group put on, and the mayor has continued it. As BJ said, there's a lot of great things that spurn from those community events that brings into our community, the Power Show in general. The fireworks are another one. The cookie walk's another one. That these are just all great events that come in. But if there were to be, and I'm going to use Charlottesville as an example, if there were to be an event that were to come to Pataskla for some odd reason and want to be treated exactly like all the other events and ask for a sign to be put up and ask to be put it in right away and want the city's crews to do it for them, I would have a hard time saying yes to that. I just wouldn't support that. But that's my own. But I don't want to be put in a position where I have to describe why I would not want that event versus the other events. And I think there has to be some criteria that says these are why these events are city partnered events, essentially. And it's a very difficult position to be in, to tell some group no, or we're not going to give you money to do that, or we're not going to put up a lighted sign for you. And if you put up a sign, I'll speak from PRA's example. We had to go through a permitting process for all our signs, and all of our signs had to be outside of the right of way, and they were strictly adhered to. I mean, that was something we had to do. That was the right thing to do. I think that we just have to set up criteria for the events and know ahead of time, so when somebody calls or somebody emails, we can answer back with, this is the city sponsored, or this is the city partnered event, this is what we've agreed to do, and if you don't like that, come to council and tell us why. And that can be our answer to them, if that's indeed the route we would go. Those are my feelings on it.
Mr. Lee.
I didn't have anything. I think BJ was ready.
I do. Quick question, Brian. So to say the city's going to partner, my feeling is, and we talked about this, is that the city should have some skin in the game as far as funds to do that. And that's what protects us almost, to say, hey, this is a city-supported event because we're going to pay to go out, put up signs, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So as people come in and say, hey, I want to have a rally, I want to have Charlottesville, I want to have whatever, that's a totally different thing maybe because we're not supporting it. If the city's going to take on some responsibility for these events and have some skin in the game to do it, is that different than those just coming in and saying, hey, I'd like to have a rally on Broad Street, or I'd like to have a rally in Freedom Park? So
I guess I don't follow different from. I mean, they're really not city. I mean, they're not city sponsored or.
But the city has money in it, are they?
Well, I mean, I guess in a way you could say it. But the other flip side is, you're like donating services. You're donating, because you're not charging for inspection fees or other things, or you're not charging someone to rent the sign to be able to use. You're saying we'll offer these things. So yeah, you do have some skin in the game, if you will, because you're sort of donating services and people and supplies is really what you're doing.
Brian, how do you differentiate between so this one that we're going to donate services to and telling the next one that we're not going to? How do you do that without causing a major issue for the city? And whether, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but just in general, if we were to identify 5 events that we will donate to, is that possible to write that up as a resolution, in essence, to say these are the five ones that we're going to be participating in?
Well, I don't know if
I
I
wouldn't
would
even say donate to. I'd say fund.
Participate.
Put some funds towards support.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would do it by legislation, because then you're like locked into legislation and it changes. You got to go back to other legislation. But you know, if you took, if you put together that list of 4 or 5, whatever it is, and you probably then said, well, why do we want to be part of these events? That criteria would probably flush itself out, so that when the next person came in or the next group came in and they didn't meet the criteria that set up the first 5, you would easily be able to say why this person or this event does not meet the criteria of those 5. I mean, I think if you did that exercise, you would probably come to the reasons, and you could then articulate what the criteria were. And then when you have the criteria, there'd be no questions, and there'd be nobody saying, well, we're being treated unfairly, because you really do have a criteria. Right now, you just can't say why you want those 5, but if you thought about it, you could come up with those reasons.
One of those criteria could be longevity in the community of being an event.
Bringing business to the community. Right. Bringing outside people to community. Even promoting communication within the community might be a good thing.
Plus, supporting our service groups, which is what all of these events do.
Right.
So, let's not forget that. And some of them, you know, some of these vary. I'm sorry. I didn't ask for the floor.
I can't quite figure out, since this is under my comments, if I actually am supposed to be chairing the floor or not, Mr. Mayor, so go ahead.
Well, my only comment is that these are community events. The city's been involved as long as I can remember with many of the city events. And the big ones, of course, they have enough money donated to where they do pay for their own security and insurance. So and the Lions Club is obviously covered with insurance, so we try to take care of all that stuff. What it ends up being at the end of the day is the guys helping out for about a half a day setting up, and about a half a day tearing it down and putting signs up. I can remember all the way back to when Steve Butcher started the Flags Over Pataskala, that the city was putting up flags and taking them down, and of course we heard flack about that too. But man, this is community stuff.
I mean, real quick, my 2 cents. I couldn't agree with that more. I think as we sit up here and we talk about these, I mean, I would just throw out, based on the criteria that we've just talked about, service organizations, bringing positive influence into the city via cash or goodwill, longevity, and then also the fact that they may cause traffic concerns or just directional concerns for that. I'm looking at the cookie walk, the fireworks, the power show, the street fair, cookout with a cop, Easter egg hunt. And I don't know if anybody has any heartburn with any of those, or if anybody thinks we should add something. I did hear one comment from the mayor about Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and I don't know if we need to include that, but that's a thought. Does anybody, Mrs. Carter?
I guess my brain goes more just to the organizational side of everything. How do we create consistency, eliminate loopholes, and have everybody on the same page? So, you know, in the past, before the city took back on the Parks and Recs, the Park Advisory Board used a rental use agreement for any of the clubs that wanted to use the fields or whatever it would be in the parks. I don't see why we couldn't do something similar at the beginning of the year or whatever. Each event or whoever's organizing the event would have to complete one of these agreements, whether we're charging money or not, but just simply to lay out all of the criteria. If it's such size, you have to have X amount of security. If it's past dark, you need to, whatever, close off whatever roads, or, just so we can create consistency with every one of them we do. It's not just going to eliminate our, risk, but it's also going to alleviate any accusation of favoritism towards one group or another if everybody has to fill out the same type of agreement and meet the same criteria.
And I wonder, I guess I would wonder, Mr. King, right now, there's probably something that people fill out for park use, and I wonder if can we task Mr. Ramsey or you or somebody with tightening that up?
There's a couple different things people fill out. So, if you look at Licking Heights or whoever wants to use fields, they fill out a field rental, field use agreement for it. And then we have a community events application as well. So there's two different things people fill out. I think we should certainly have one, all of that, and figure out what we want from it. I certainly think that the city's okay to participate in some of these events. I also think that the city should require some liability insurance for some sort of stuff. So, I think we're reinventing what we're trying to do here. We've certainly grown. These events have become bigger. We have more people coming into them, and I think it's time to take a good hard look at these, and I think this is a good start. I think that, I will always encourage community events. Always. And I think everybody up here would. We're certainly getting some flack for some of the stuff the city's doing. I'm okay with what the city's doing with those, to be honest with you. I think it is something that the city should do, cities do. It's the right thing to do to encourage people to come to those. So at the end of the day, I think we need, and we'll work on one permit for these and share with Mr. Zetz and make sure everything's in place. But, I am in full support of community events. Whatever we can do to help bring people to the city, bring residents to the events, whether it's putting up signs, whether it's, whatever it is, I think it's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And it's the sort of thing that it's a nominal amount at the end of the day that we're talking about. So I fail to see and I know there's concerns, but with what we have, it's the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Real quickly, I know this probably went a little longer than you'd hope, so I'll make this brief. I agree with pretty much everything that everybody said up here, so there's no reason to repeat it, but to highlight it, I agree that we do need to support city events, and they're great for the city, but I agree with the consistency, and I agree with, we've had some long conversations about this, and I do believe that something needs to be in writing so that we have a standard. With that being said, I don't think that should be, I think we should be careful that it's not so comprehensive, whatever it is, that the groups that we have now, it runs them off. I think we need something, but we don't need a 10-page document that people look at and go, no. And we run off good people for that. So I think there's something there to be done, but it doesn't have to be a book. I'd just like to say too, I didn't realize this, but just being a new business owner, I didn't realize how impactful these events were for small businesses, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that these events do help small business. I've seen it firsthand, and I know there's other businesses that are impacted by it. So I think that's an important point to end on. So that's all I got.
Am I missing anything? Very well. I'll turn it back over. That's all for mine.
Mr. Zetz.
Just 10 things. No, just kidding.
Sorry.
Nothing.
Mr. King.
Just a couple things, Mayor. First of all, our all-call system is operational. We're going to have training within the next week of those who are going to be using it, so we'll start advertising that soon, getting people signed up to use it. The second thing is, and I know I just came back, but October 22nd through the 26th, I will be in San Antonio for the International City Management Association Conference. I look forward to it. Seeing what I can learn from counterparts and bringing stuff back. So happy to answer any questions.
Anything for Beat? Yes, sir.
Mr. King, do you have any update on the resolutions, or I'm sorry, not resolutions, but the
Ordinances.
ordinances?
About Mink Street?
Yes.
Yes. Certainly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we need to leave those tabled tonight. We have tried unsuccessfully. We haven't, but the post office tried unsuccessfully to deliver the certified mail. They're not being picked up. Next thing is, based on ODOT, is to send them regular mail with a record of how we sent them. So as far as tonight, leave those tabled.
Anything else for BJ? All right, Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you, Mayor. At each of your seats tonight, you have a little light reading. The annual budget, comprehensive budget book has been completed. So when you, as BJ mentioned earlier, if you get done reading it or you get through it and you want to sit down with us, please just give us a call, email. We're happy to spend any time that you need to go through it. I think we've done it with a number of you guys, and I think I don't speak for you, but I think everyone who's done it has found it helpful because then we're able to go into more detail. When we sit as a group, it's a lot of information to go over in a very short period of time. So sometimes we're able to kind of go through the highlights and kind of walk you through it a little more easily. So let one of us know. We'll schedule some time to sit down with any of you that wish to do that. A couple things from my report. We submitted the 2006 or 2017 budget document to the GFOA's award program, and we just got notice that our 2017 budget document received the Distinguished Budget Award. So, yay, another recognition from the GFOA, which is really great. One other thing was I had the honor of being sworn in by Auditor State Yost as the president-elect for the Ohio GFOA. So I will be president-elect next year, or this coming year, and be president of the organization the year following. So,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Anything for Jamie?
Good show.
I just want to back up one quick second here. Nathan, thank you so much for your expertise. While Mr. King was out of town, I had a couple issues which you took care of very quickly, and I appreciate that. Go ahead, Nate.
We conducted hydrant flushing last week. We have no hydrants that are out of service, so that's good. Just a couple maintenance issues that are minor. They're not out of service, everything well. And that was a success. And then I put a copy of the inspection report on Beechwood Trail Tower number 1. Hopefully you're able to see that in color just to get an idea of what the interior coatings look like. Nothing unusual for something that's been in here for over 30 years, but something that we're going to look to address with the 2019 budget. We can't do it 18, so we'll look to 19 to see if we can repose to that tower. So, be happy to answer any questions.
Anything for Nate? Thank you, sir. Alan? Oh, was there a question? I'm sorry.
Nate, I'd shot you an email about some things I had seen on the Pataskala Facebook page, not the city's Facebook page. Any?
I couldn't find it.
I'll show it to you on my Facebook.
Yeah,
I'll show it to you.
something I looked and I don't have a
It's a secret organization, designed to wreak havoc in the city. So I'll show you that. I got the magic decoder ring, and I'll get it to you after the meeting. Okay, awesome, great.
Alan?
Couple project updates. First of all, the Taylor Road culvert, the pipe has been made, it's curing now, so we're looking at starting the Taylor Road culvert around October 16th. So the contractor will let people know about that, so as soon as we nail that down, and that should be closed for roughly 8 weeks. Taylor Road just south of the tracks. 2017 ramp, we are almost done with that. There's concrete work left to do as well as news. Most of that's because we had some consistency built in and a bunch of base repairs that we ended up needing after switching a little bit from this. The Columbia Road Bridge, that is currently closed. They're working on driving piles and forming up concrete, and it looks like that one is progressing on schedule. And then the Columbia Road culvert there south of Mill Street, that one, they will be mobilizing for that next Monday, and intend to shut that down the following Monday. And notified about that.
Remind me, the culvert on Columbia, how long will that be closed?
Anticipating about 45 days, about a month and a half.
Okay, and the bridge was about the same?
Bridge is
75.
75, okay.
Either 75 or 90.
75.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Barstow?
I have a question. It's really directed to Mr. Haynes, but maybe Mr. Zetz or Mr. King can help answer this. I'm not sure. After, say, an automobile accident, there's a lot of glass in a public intersection. Whose responsibility is to clean that up? Okay.
We usually,
Or the chief,
Public
anybody
Service
want
Department
to
gets
throw in
called
on it?
out for those sorts of things legally. I'll leave that up to Mr. Zetz.
Making sure we don't have a sneeze attack.
The chief wants to chime in, Mr. Mayor.
It's usually the Public Service Department gets called out to clean that sort of stuff up, but from a legal standpoint, we do it legally. I'll leave that
I
up
don't
to
think we have
Mr.
a legal obligation to do it, but I guess if we're made aware and it's really presenting a hazard, we might have some duty at that point, but otherwise.
Chief?
The Ohio Revised Code states that the tow truck driver is responsible for that.
That's what I thought, but I didn't have a chance to look up that code section, so.
Okay.
So it's the tow driver that shows up if there's a big, some sort of mess from glass or debris or something?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
That's good to know.
He will then bill the penalty, but yes.
I've never seen a tow truck driver with a blower and a shovel and all that stuff, but that's what you need.
Now
to
you
clean up
know,
that
so you
stuff.
can stop and offer him one.
No, I know.
Mr. Mayor, I have, but I just didn't know if that was something that the company decided they were going to do, or if it was an ORC requirement, but I thought it was an ORC
The kind of
requirement. I
equipment
wasn't
you
sure.
have to clean it up the right way. Not just a shovel.
Thanks,
and broom.
thanks, guys.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
He's got one.
Mr. Walther.
Al, did you happen to, I didn't get a report in my packet from you?
I wasn't here.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
he
you-
was out of town as well.
Okay, that's
As
fine.
was
I didn't,
so.
didn't know if I missed it. I was looking for it. Okay.
Actually, you're just the only one that didn't get
I
it.
figured he just didn't put me on him. That's right.
We're looking for a short meeting tonight.
Vacations came into play, so.
That's cool. I just,
Yes.
see if I missed
Alan,
it.
I'm assuming, the gentleman from Bristol that was here earlier, I'm assuming since both of you guys were out of town, that's why he called and you guys didn't get back with him
Well,
because he was
yeah.
out.
Happy to answer any questions about that.
All I was going to keep it brief. If we could maybe set something up, I'd be glad to go out. Shoot me an email if you have any info. But yeah, that's the first I'd heard of it. So just want to make sure.
Can you just CC me on city email on your communication with Mr. D'Onofrio?
No doubt.
Thank you.
Okay.
Certainly will, and
Set something
that's
up.
one that a couple years ago was promised if they filled out a petition, it'd be done. Which, as we know, petitions don't mean it's going to be done. So
I'd say you blame it on Dan. He said Mr. Hayes.
Yeah, he did keep.
I think it's totally all Dan.
I
Well,
didn't
when
catch that.
Mr.
Already
Mayor,
done.
I'm part of the cause that Mr. D'Onofrio was here, but when I was talking to Mr. D'Onofrio on Saturday, he kept talking about this guy named Hayes that had promised all these things, and Miss Hayes, that's what I was thinking
Well,
was.
he
sounds like Dan.
he promised me a shed too. So
If I had known that at the time, I would have mentioned that to Mr.
let me know if you get anywhere.
Okay.
Sounds a lot like Dan.
Anything else for Alan?
Thanks, Alan.
Scott?
Thank you, sir. We will have at the next council meeting a public hearing for 2 code amendments, food truck regulations, and one updating the notification requirements for both Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning and Zoning Commission. Also, the request for qualifications, or RFQ, for the comprehensive plan was advertised on September 19th. That went up on our website. And also the Ohio American Planning Association website, they have a section on there for RFQs, so that went on there.
since it was posted on the 19th, we've had about 6 inquiries from consultants that are interested in the comprehensive plan. So once we get their submittals, we'll go through those and choose who we speak with directly in an interview or more formal setting regarding the comprehensive plan. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, sir. Chief,
I have nothing tonight.
any committee chair reports? Okay. Let's see, table. Ordinance 2017-4293 for a third reading.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Barstow.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Hicken. Kathy, when you're ready, third reading.
Ordinance 2017-4293, this is the third reading. An ordinance amending section 1221.05 of the codified ordinances of the city of Pataskla and repealing all their ordinances and parts of the ordinances in conflict therewith.
Any discussion? Any motion to adopt?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
make a motion to adopt ordinance 2017-4293.
Got a motion? Need a
Second.
second. Seconded by Mr. Barstow. Discussion? And roll.
Barstow,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Hicken,
Yes.
Walther,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Howe,
Yes.
Hayes,
Yes.
Ordinance passes. New business, ordinance 2017-4299 for a first reading.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Barstow and seconded by Mr. Hicken. Kathy, when you're ready, first reading.
Ordinance 2017-4299, this is the first reading, an ordinance to make appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the city of Pataskla, state of Ohio during the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2018, and to authorize approved interfund transfers.
Discussion? Okay, resolutions, motions, okay, additional citizens' comments. Any, yeah, I'm sorry. Do you have something?
That's all right. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to appoint T.J. Rodeback and Chad McKittrick to the to BZA, Board of Zoning Appeals, and Mr. Dan Cordy to the Personnel Board of Review.
Got a motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Barstow. Discussion? And roll, please.
Higgins,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Howe,
Yes.
Hayes,
Yes.
Barstow,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Motion passes. Any other motions tonight, folks? All righty. Additional citizens' comments. Anybody wish to speak? Okay, we'll go roundy round. Start with Mrs. Carter.
I feel like I say the same thing at every meeting, but Chief, your guys have been phenomenal in the past 2 weeks at Heights, and certainly appreciate that presence and reassurance. And probably had too much fun hanging out with Deputy Chief Bowles outside of the homecoming dance Saturday evening. So, but again, they do a great job. The kids trust them, and we appreciate it.
Mr. Barstow?
I don't have anything, sir.
Mr. Lee?
Me neither.
Mr. Hicken?
My thanks to those individuals that took the time to apply and were appointed tonight. Congratulations to Mr. Nicholson, was said at the time, but I appreciate that. And my thanks also to Mr. Cooey, who helped me a couple of times. We stayed in touch during Mr. King's absence, and I appreciated him getting back with me quickly. That's it.
Mr. Zett?
Nothing.
Mrs. Hayes?
Yeah, congratulations. That's exciting. That's great for our city. Chief, your officers are awesome out at Lynn's Fruit Farm this weekend. That is insane. What a cool thing in our city to have. So we went out there, take our daughter to a rugby clinic, and those guys had that whole intersection working like clockwork, so that was awesome. And then just it's kind of nice to sit here and just listen to the fact that we can talk and have good conversations and really want what's best for the city. So enjoyed that this evening. Thank you.
Andy?
Two things. One, I wanted to thank you, Mayor, for putting on yet another great power show. You know, the community events are fantastic for our city, and all of them are, including the power show. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, and effort more than anything to do it. So thank you very much. And secondly, there's yet another great event happening right now. It's the Haunted Forest that's being put on. It's every weekend through October, and it is fun and scary and lots of kids, and it's a great time out there. They really have a great time. So if you have a chance, try to make it out there.
And it's for kids.
It is for
And that
kids. It's
scares
absolutely
the
for
bejeebies out of
kids.
me. It's for kids.
Absolutely for
I
kids.
can't handle it.
Go and instill
If
duck.
you want to see an embarrassing Suzanne, take me
Andy,
to
there's
the
no
home.
clown scenes, is there?
Yeah, there is.
Chainsaws that get me.
I'm out.
It's chainsaw
There are chainsaws and clowns. Yes. So,
Just give me my money.
It's pretty great. That's all I have. Thanks.
Now, before we go to Mr. Powell, just to keep it on the up and up here, let's keep focused on the events and how we're going to do it, because the cookie walk will be quickly approaching. So, and that's primarily a Pataskala Lions event, but there's a lot of people involved, and we had talked about, for safety reasons, shutting down the street like we do at the street fair, because there's just so much traffic, foot traffic with kids and families and the parade and stuff. So let's keep that at the top of our list.
In 36 or 38 businesses, I think there's already some large sponsorships already committed for that. So yeah, I agree. If we can keep that moving, that'd be great.
Mr. Powell?
I have nothing. I move we adjourn.
Got a motion to adjourn,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Walther. Discussion and roll.
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Powell,
Yes.
Hayes,
Yes.
Barstow,
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Everybody put your chairs down.
Will do.
Yes. Tell me again, 6th District Court, is that right? Who did the reverse?
Yeah, the Sixth Court of Appeals.